The first thing that hit me wasn't the sight of the water, but the smell, rot, the sweet, sickly scent of dying plants and earth that's been soaked for too long. It was the smell of my retirement, my peace, my entire small business, drowning. I stood there, water up to my shins, the cold seeping through my jeans. My greenhouse, my sanctuary, was a murky aquarium. My heirloom tomatoes, the black crims, and the brandy wines I'd spent years cultivating were just sad, bobbing shapes under a foot of brown water. My hand tightened around the one thing I'd managed to grab from my workshop before wading in, my old brass water sampler. It was heavy, solid, a relic from another time. My mentor, Old Man Fitz, gave it to me decades ago when I was just a young hydrologist. "This thing doesn't lie, Mark," he'd said, his voice raspy from a lifetime of cheap cigars. "People lie, governments lie, but water always tells the truth." Right then, the truth was a bitter pill. That's when I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. I didn't have to look. I knew who it was. Karen, the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association. She stood at the edge of the disaster, arms crossed, a smug little smile playing on her lips. She was flanked by two guys who looked like they were built out of spare truck parts. She didn't offer help. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just watched me for a moment, enjoying the view. Then she took a deliberate step forward and held out a piece of paper. "Mr. Landis," she said, her voice like grinding glass, "I believe this is for you." I waded out of the muck, my boots squelching with every step, and took the notice. My eyes scanned the bold print. Fine, $5,000. Reason, unauthorized drainage alteration causing community water runoff. I looked up from the paper, then back at my flooded greenhouse, then at her face. The sheer unmitigated gall of it almost made me laugh. I hadn't altered a thing. If anything, I was the victim here. I felt that old, familiar heat rise in my chest, the kind of anger that makes you want to either scream or just walk away and never look back. "Karen, you've got to be kidding me," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Mr. Landis," she replied, the smile never leaving her face, "your little farm is just a dirty puddle. You can pay the fine, or we can help you dry it out, permanently." Now, let me back up a little, so you understand how we got here. I'm a man in my 50s. I spent 30 years as a hydrologist, working on massive dam projects, city water systems, you name it. I've seen what happens when people mess with water. It always wins. When my wife passed, I cashed out, bought this 5-acre patch of land, and decided to live out my days doing the one thing that brought me peace, growing things. But I made one critical mistake. I bought property that fell under the jurisdiction of a homeowners association, and if you're watching Karenology, you probably know where this is going. Karen ran the place like her own private kingdom. She had this habit of adjusting her oversized glasses, pushing them up her nose with one perfectly manicured finger, right before delivering bad news. It was a little gesture that said, "I am about to ruin your day, and I'm going to enjoy it." For months, the fight had been about small things. The length of my grass, the unapproved color of my mailbox. But this was different. This was a declaration of war. I didn't waste time arguing with her thugs. I went straight to the source. The HOA office was a sterile, soulless room in the community clubhouse that smelled faintly of lemon-scented bleach and desperation. Karen was behind her desk, looking as pleased as a cat who'd cornered a mouse. "This is insane," I started, placing the fine on her desk. "I'm a hydrologist, Karen. The water is backing up from the new retaining wall you guys built for the community garden last fall. It's blocked the natural spillway." She leaned back, her chair groaning in protest. "Your old maps don't matter, Mr. Landis. We're about progress here. We follow the new approved community plans." She tapped a massive leather-bound binder on her desk. The HOA rulebook. Her Bible. Have you ever tried to argue with someone who holds all the cards and they know it? It's like punching water. There's no resistance, just a cold, indifferent yielding that swallows your energy whole. I knew then that logic wasn't going to work. This wasn't about drainage. It was about power. My little farm was an eyesore to her manicured vision of the neighborhood. It was a piece of land she coveted for her next community project, which usually meant a kickback from a contractor buddy. I was about to tell her exactly where she could file her $5,000 fine when she held up a hand. And then she did it. She pushed her glasses up her nose with that one finger. The smile on her face was gone, replaced by something cold and sharp. "Oh, and about that fine," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Consider that an introductory offer. The board is meeting tomorrow night to discuss escalating measures. For the good of the community, of course." She finally gave me a real smile. It didn't reach her eyes. I walked out of that office, her words hanging in the stale air. Back at my farm, the sun was setting, casting long, bruised purple shadows. The floodwater hadn't receded. If anything, it seemed to have crept a few inches closer to my front door. The community center the next evening was a sweatbox. The air, thick with the smell of cheap coffee and hostility, felt heavy enough to chew. I found a seat in the back, trying to make myself small, but it was no use. Every pair of eyes in that room felt like a physical weight on my shoulders. Karen stood at the podium, basking in the fluorescent glow like a saint in a stained glass window, if the saint was a ruthless suburban dictator. She let the silence hang for a moment before she started, her voice oozing synthetic sympathy. She spoke of shared values and protecting our investments. Then she got to the main event. Me. "Mr. Landis's situation," she began, "while unfortunate, represents a clear and present danger to our community's integrity and property values." She let that sink in. "Therefore, to mitigate the ongoing risk and to cover the initial consultation fees with our environmental lawyers, the board has voted unanimously. The fine is now $7,500, effective immediately." A wave of murmurs washed over the room. Not outrage, not sympathy. It was the sound of a flock of sheep agreeing with the wolf that one of them had to go. I felt my hands clench into fists under the table. This wasn't about a fine anymore. This was a public execution. I had to say something. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. The room went dead quiet. "This isn't about risk," I said, my voice steady, surprising even myself. "It's about a blocked culvert. The retaining wall you all approved last year. It's sitting directly on top of a primary natural spillway. I have the county survey maps from before the development was built. The water has nowhere else to go." Karen gave me a look that could curdle milk. "With all due respect, Mr. Landis," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "we are not interested in your historical documents or your personal theories. We are a community governed by rules, not by one man's hobby farm." A few people snickered, and that's when I saw it. The glow of a dozen phone screens. People weren't just listening, they were broadcasting. My humiliation was becoming community entertainment. I sat down, defeated. The vote was a formality. My case was dismissed. The walk home felt a mile long. The moment I stepped inside, my phone started buzzing on the kitchen counter. It didn't stop. I picked it up. It was a notification from the neighborhood Facebook group. Someone had posted a picture of my flooded greenhouse with the caption, "Is this the nature we want in our backyards? Mark Landis's swamp is a hazard to our kids and pets." The comments were a bloodbath. Disgraceful. He should be forced to sell. My dog got sick just walking past his property. Then came the notifications from my online store. 1-star reviews, one after another. Seller sent me diseased plants. My whole garden died after using his soil. Do not buy. This man is a scammer. All posted within the last hour. My orders, my only source of income, had flatlined. From 100 a day to 0, just like that. I sank into a chair, the phone slipping from my hand. Have you ever felt that punch in the gut feeling? When you realize you're not just fighting a person, you're fighting a story they've told about you, and the story is winning. I felt utterly alone, cornered in my own home by a mob of strangers on the internet. The water outside was just a symptom. The real flood was happening right here, in my life. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark. An hour? 2? A sharp knock on the door jolted me out of my stupor. I wasn't expecting anyone. I grabbed the heavy cast iron skillet from the stove, you never know, and peered through the peephole. It was Hank, the old vet from a few houses down. A man of few words and even fewer smiles. He'd lived here since this whole area was just fields. I opened the door. He stood on my porch, a silhouette against the dim security light, holding a rolled-up piece of paper. He didn't waste time with greetings. "Saw what they did to you at the meeting," he grunted, his voice like gravel. "Bunch of vultures." He pushed the roll of paper into my hand. They think they own the land. They don't. The land remembers. I unrolled it carefully under the porch light. It was a map, an old, brittle topographical survey from the 1970s. The paper was yellowed and smelled of dust and time, but the lines were clear, and there it was. A faint blue line showing a natural waterway. A creek running right where Karen's beloved community garden and its retaining wall now stood. It wasn't a legal document. It wouldn't hold up in any homeowners association meeting, but as I looked at that faint blue line, an idea began to form in my mind. A cold, clear, and dangerous idea. Fitz was right. The water tells the truth. And I was about to give it a voice. My hands stopped shaking. The war wasn't over. It had just entered a new phase. That old map felt like a shield in my hands. The paper was brittle, and it crackled when I spread it out on my kitchen table, but the lines drawn on it were a testament to a truth older than any homeowners association. It was proof, not legal proof maybe, but physical proof. And with it, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in days. Fight. I wasn't just a crazy old man with a flooded farm anymore. I was a man with a map. The next morning, I was on the phone with the county planning department. I got bounced around a bit, you know how it is. Transferred from one bored-sounding clerk to another. But I was persistent. I finally got a hold of someone in the water management division who actually seemed to listen. I explained the situation calmly and professionally, using the right terms, describing the blockage and the topographical data from the old survey. "Okay, Mr. Landis," the woman on the other end said, her voice tired but not unkind. "Based on what you're describing, you have grounds to request an official site inspection. I'll put in the request. An inspector should be out within 48 hours. For the first time in a week, I felt a crack of light break through the gloom. This was it. An official, impartial third party. Someone who understood hydrology, not just HOA politics. Karen could bully the neighbors, but she couldn't bully a county official. Or so I thought. 2 days later, a pristine White County truck rolled up my driveway. The man who stepped out was the dictionary definition of a bureaucrat. He wore a crisp shirt, a tie that was a little too tight, and shoes that were far too clean for a farm. He smelled of cheap aftershave and authority. His name was Davis. I walked him through it all. I showed him the standing water, the damage to my greenhouse. I laid Hank's old map next to the HOA's newer, simplified plot plan on the hood of his truck. "You see," I said, tracing the old creek bed with my finger. "They built the retaining wall right here. It's a dam. It's basic fluid dynamics." He nodded slowly, his face unreadable. He took some pictures, made a few notes on a clipboard. He seemed thorough. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope. And that, my friends, is always the mistake. Just as he was about to wrap up, another car pulled in. It was Karen, of course. She walked over, all smiles and concern, with a younger woman I recognized from a few houses down. Linda, a single mom with a couple of young kids. We'd always been friendly. I'd given her son a basket of my best tomatoes last summer. "Mr. Davis," Karen began, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "I'm so glad you're here. We are all so worried about this situation." She gestured vaguely at my flooded property. "We just want what's best and safest for the community." Davis cleared his throat. "Well, I've reviewed the site, and while the water level is high, the community's recent landscaping and construction fall within the approved county plans from 2008. He tapped his clipboard. "These plans supersede any older, uncertified surveys. I'm afraid there's nothing the county can do." The words hit me like a physical blow. It was over, just like that. But Karen wasn't done. She turned to Linda. "Linda, honey, you live just over there. Didn't you mention you saw something a few weeks ago?" Linda looked down at her feet. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She mumbled something. "What was that, dear?" Karen prompted, putting a hand on her shoulder. Linda looked up, her eyes wide with something I couldn't place. Fear? Guilt? I saw him," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I saw Mr. Landis out here with a shovel, near the culvert. He was digging." It was a lie, a complete bald-faced fabrication. And it was the kill shot. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, someone you thought was a friend? It leaves a hole in you that no amount of anger can fill. I just stared at her, speechless. I saw a flicker of shame in her eyes before she looked away for good. Karen's smile was triumphant. "Thank you, Linda. We appreciate your honesty." She turned back to me, her eyes glittering with victory. "Well, Mark, it seems the truth is out." The inspector, Davis, just shrugged, packed up his clipboard, and drove away. He didn't even look back. The show was over. That evening, I found another envelope taped to my door. It wasn't a fine, it was an invoice from the Homeowners Association for services rendered, a line item for the independent environmental assessment conducted by Mr. Davis. The total was $15,000. I stood there on my porch, holding the bill, the world spinning around me. They hadn't just beaten me, they had made me pay for my own execution. I was broke, my reputation was destroyed, and I was utterly, completely alone. The water lapped at the edge of my porch, a quiet, mocking reminder of my failure. And for the first time, I genuinely considered just letting it win, just letting it all wash away. That night was the lowest I've been in a long, long time. I just sat in my worn-out armchair, the $15,000 invoice on the table like a tombstone for my savings. The house was quiet, except for the faint, maddening sound of water sloshing against the foundation. It was the sound of defeat. Each gentle wave was a whisper. You lost. You lost. You lost. My gaze fell on the old brass water sampler sitting on the mantelpiece. Fitz's words echoed in my head. Water always tells the truth. Yeah, right. The truth had just cost me 15 grand and what was left of my good name. I felt a surge of rage, so pure and hot it almost choked me. I wanted to smash something. I wanted to burn that whole fraudulent community garden to the ground. But you know what? Anger is a funny thing. It can destroy you, or it can burn away all the doubt and fear and leave you with a core of pure, hard clarity. And as I sat there, staring at that invoice, the rage started to cool, crystallizing into a single, cold thought. I had been trying to prove I was right. That was the mistake. Now, I just had to prove they were wrong. Sometime after midnight, there was a timid knock at my door. So quiet, I almost thought I'd imagined it. I wasn't in the mood for visitors, especially not after Linda's performance. But the knock came again, a little more urgent this time. I looked through the peephole. It was her. Linda? I almost didn't open the door. What could she possibly want? To twist the knife a little deeper? But something in her posture, the way she was huddled against the cold, made me turn the lock. The moment I opened the door, she burst into tears. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she sobbed, not even looking at me. I had to. Had to what, Linda?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Ruin me?" She shook her head, her whole body trembling. "She threatened me. Karen, she said she'd report me to child services for unsafe living conditions because my fence has a broken slat. She said they'd take my kids." And just like that, the last of my anger evaporated, replaced by a cold, sickening understanding of the game Karen was playing. This wasn't just about power or money. It was about cruelty. It was about seeing how far she could push people. You ever meet someone like that? Someone who finds joy not in their own success, but in the misery of others? "She made me lie," Linda whispered, finally looking up. Her eyes were red and raw. "I feel so ashamed. I know it's not enough, but I wanted to give you this." She pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. "I work part-time as a bookkeeper. I do some of the HOA's overflow work from home. This is a copy of their insurance policy. I heard her on the phone with the insurance agent once, screaming about liability. I don't know if it helps, but it's all I have." I looked down at the document. It was a standard commercial liability policy, dense with legalese and fine print. But as I scanned the pages, a few phrases jumped out. Phrases like environmental contamination exclusion, liability due to uncertified construction, and gross negligence. It was a long shot, but it was a shot. It was a new angle of attack, a new battlefield. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. I looked at Linda, who was still standing there, looking small and broken. "Go home, Linda," I said, my voice softer now. "Be with your kids and fix that fence slat." She nodded, wiping her eyes, and scurried off into the darkness. I watched her go, then closed the door. I walked over to the kitchen table and spread out the insurance policy next to Hank's old map. The pieces were all there. They just didn't fit together yet. I needed one more thing. I needed evidence that was undeniable, not a map, not a policy, something they couldn't dismiss as an uncertified document or a personal theory. I needed to make the water talk, and I knew just how to do it. I went out to my workshop, the one place that hadn't been touched by the flood. The air smelled of sawdust and oil and potential. I dug through an old footlocker until I found what I was looking for, a case of industrial-grade, non-toxic fluorescent tracer dye, the kind we used to use to track underground water flows in massive cave systems. It was harmless to the environment, but under a blacklight, it glowed with an unholy, impossible-to-ignore green light. I held one of the vials up to the light. Karen wanted to play dirty. Fine. Let's see how she likes it when things get messy. I wasn't going to fight her with rules and regulations anymore. I was going to fight her with science. My science. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I was learning how to surf, and I was about to make a very big wave. That night, the world felt different. The air was crisp and cold, and the only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of the highway. It was the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only person left on Earth. Hank met me at the edge of my property, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a heavy-duty flashlight in the other. He didn't ask what the plan was. He just nodded, his weathered face set in a grim line. He knew. We moved like ghosts through the manicured lawns of the neighborhood, sticking to the shadows. Our target was the community garden, Karen's pride and joy. It sat on a raised plot of land, held in place by that brand-new retaining wall. Right below it, hidden by a bed of overpriced ornamental grasses, was the drain I knew led to the blocked culvert. "You sure about this, son?" Hank whispered, his voice a low rumble. "No," I replied honestly, "but it's the only move I've got left." I knelt down and pulled the grate off the drain. The smell of stagnant water and decay wafted up, even stronger here than on my own property. This was the source. I took a deep breath and emptied 3 vials of the fluorescent dye into the dark water. The liquid was thick, like syrup, and it made a soft glug-glug-glug sound as it disappeared into the pipe. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, we waited. We walked the perimeter of the garden, following the path I knew the water should be taking. According to the old maps, the spillway was supposed to feed into a small creek that ran along the back of the properties and eventually emptied into Miller's Pond a mile away. But the creek bed was bone dry. We found where the dye had gone about an hour later. It wasn't in the creek. It was seeping up from the ground, creating a series of foul-smelling, iridescent green puddles right in the middle of the new community playground. The brand-new wood chips were soaked, and the base of the slide was already submerged in a shimmering, alien-looking goo. The blocked water wasn't just flooding me. It was turning the entire common area into a toxic swamp. Hank shone his flashlight on the mess. Under the beam, the green was so vibrant it almost hurt to look at. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "You weren't kidding." I took out my phone and started taking pictures, dozens of them, from every angle. This wasn't a historical document. This was happening right now. This was the kind of evidence that couldn't be ignored. I felt a grim satisfaction. This was Karen's perfect little kingdom, and I had just revealed the rot underneath. The next morning, all hell broke loose. The first calls started hitting the neighborhood Facebook group around 7 a.m. Pictures of the glowing green swamp where kids were supposed to be playing, panic, outrage, and, of course, blame. But here's the thing about a cornered rat like Karen. She doesn't surrender. She bites harder. By 10 a.m., she had posted an official HOA statement. It was a masterpiece of misdirection. She didn't deny the green sludge. She embraced it. She called it an act of eco-terrorism, a malicious chemical attack on the community by a disgruntled resident. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. She announced an emergency cleanup and a special assessment to cover the costs. And then, the master stroke. She posted a carefully edited security camera, still from a neighbor's house. It was grainy, time-stamped from the middle of the night. It showed 2 figures, one tall, one shorter, near the community garden. It was me and Hank. The caption read, "The culprits have been identified. The sheriff's department has been notified." My phone started ringing. It was Hank. "Mark," he said, his voice tight with anger. "There's a deputy's car pulling into my driveway." Before I could even respond, I heard the crunch of tires on my own gravel. I looked out the window. A sheriff's car was parked behind my truck, its lights flashing silently, painting the morning in strokes of red and blue. A deputy was walking toward my front door. I've never been arrested in my life. Have you ever had that moment where the floor just drops out from under you? Where you realize that no matter how right you are, you've been outmaneuvered so completely that you look to all the world like the bad guy? This was that moment. Karen hadn't just beaten me. She had set a trap, and I had walked right into it with my eyes wide open. The truth, it turned out, could be twisted into a very effective weapon, and it was pointed right at my head. The deputy was young, with a face that hadn't yet been hardened by the job. He was polite, almost apologetic, but firm. "Sir, I'm not arresting you," he explained after I'd opened the door, "but we've received a formal complaint about property damage and the release of an unknown substance. I need to ask you and Mr. Hank to come down to the station to give a statement." It wasn't an arrest, but it felt like one. Sitting in the back of that patrol car, watching my farm disappear in the rearview mirror, was one of the most humiliating moments of my life. The whole neighborhood was watching. I could see the curtains twitching in every window. I was the villain in their little suburban drama, being hauled away by the law. The station smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. They put me and Hank in separate windowless rooms. For 3 hours, they asked me the same questions over and over. What was the substance? Why was I there in the middle of the night? Did I understand the severity of the situation? I told them the truth. I explained that it was a non-toxic tracer dye. I explained the blocked culvert. I showed them the pictures on my phone. The detective listened, nodding, his face a perfect mask of professional neutrality. But I could see it in his eyes. He thought I was a crank, a bitter old man with a grudge. They finally let us go around dusk, with a warning not to interfere with a community investigation. As I walked out of the station, blinking in the fading light, my phone buzzed. It was a mass email from Karen. She was announcing a special community-wide spring fair to be held at the playground that coming weekend. A celebration of our resilience and unity in the face of recent challenges, it read. I knew what it was. It was a victory lap, a public spectacle to cement her power and my defeat. She'd have the area cleaned up, put up some balloons, and declare the crisis over. The narrative would be set in stone. Karen, the protector of the community, had triumphed over the crazy farmer. But as I read that email, a new plan began to click into place. It was a crazy high-risk gambit, but it was all I had left. The fair wasn't just her victory lap. It was my stage. She had given me an audience. I spent the next 2 days on the phone, calling in favors I hadn't touched in 20 years. I called my old contacts in geology, in environmental engineering, and, most importantly, in the insurance industry. That's where Linda's gift came in. I didn't tell them the whole story. I just fed them pieces. I asked questions about liability, about policy exclusions for uncertified construction, about what happens when a non-profit like a homeowners association is found to be grossly negligent. The key conversation was with a guy named Frank, a senior underwriter I'd worked with on a dam project years ago. He was a bulldog, a man who hated losing money more than anything. I emailed him the HOA's insurance policy and a few of the pictures of the glowing green sludge. I didn't ask him to do anything. I just asked him, hypothetically, Frank, what would you do if you found out one of your clients was hiding a potential $1 million liability claim? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Hypothetically, he said, his voice turning to ice, I'd be on the next flight. The day of the fair arrived. It was a perfect spring day, the kind that makes you believe in second chances. The playground was scrubbed clean. There were bounce houses, hot dog stands, and a small stage where a local band was butchering a cover of a classic rock song. Karen was everywhere, shaking hands, kissing babies, the benevolent queen surveying her loyal subjects. I found Hank by the lemonade stand. He looked tired. It's over, Mark, he said, his voice heavy. We lost. It's not over yet, I replied, handing him a small, discreet earpiece. Just put this in and stand by the stage. When I give the signal, I need you to make a call. I walked toward the stage. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me. The whispers started, a ripple of hostility spreading through the crowd. I didn't care. I saw Karen spot me. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face, quickly replaced by a smug, confident smile. She thought I was there to make a scene, to embarrass myself one last time. She had no idea. As I got closer, I saw a man in a crisp suit standing near the back of the crowd, his arms crossed, his face like a thundercloud. It was Frank, the insurance underwriter. He'd made it. He caught my eye and gave me a curt, almost imperceptible nod. All the pieces were in place. Karen took the stage to give her big speech. She talked about community, safety, and vigilance. As she was winding up for her grand finale, I walked right up to the side of the stage. The crowd murmured, expecting a confrontation. Karen looked down at me, her eyes full of triumphant pity. "Do you have something to say, Mr. Landis?" she asked into the microphone, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. I didn't answer. I just held up my old brass water sampler. The sun glinted off it. It was my signal. It was time for the water to tell its final truth. I stood there by the stage, holding that brass sampler up like it was a king's scepter. The crowd went quiet. All eyes were on me. Karen on the stage looked momentarily confused, her victory speech faltering. She expected me to shout, to argue. She didn't expect silence. I gave Hank a slight nod. He raised his phone to his ear. "What is the meaning of this, Mr. Landis?" Karen said into the microphone, trying to regain control. "If you have a complaint, you can submit it in writing." I ignored her. I walked to the edge of the playground, to a spot near the base of the slide that looked perfectly clean, perfectly innocent. But I knew what was underneath. I knelt down, screwed the top off the sampler, and drove it deep into the soft earth, through the fresh wood chips. It made a sickening, squelching sound. The crowd murmured, confused. When I pulled the sampler out, it was full of dark, muddy water. I walked back toward the stage, holding it up for everyone to see. "You can't just cover up a problem, Karen," I said, my voice calm and clear, but loud enough to carry. "Water remembers." Just then, a man in a sharp suit pushed his way to the front of the crowd. It was Frank, the underwriter. He looked furious. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice booming with authority. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to Karen. "This is just a disgruntled resident causing a scene," Karen stammered, but the confidence had drained from her face. "Is it?" Frank shot back. He strode over to me. He didn't need a chemical test. He could smell it, the faint, lingering odor of rot and stagnant water. "My company holds the liability policy for this association. A policy that, I might add, does not cover environmental damage resulting from uncertified construction or gross negligence." You could have heard a pin drop. The words gross negligence hung in the air like poison gas. The neighbors looked at each other, the festive mood evaporating. They were starting to understand. This wasn't just about my farm anymore. This was about their homes, their money. I handed the full water sampler to Frank. "Here," I said, "a sample for your records." Frank took it, his eyes boring into Karen. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dangerously low, "my team will be here on Monday to begin a full-scale audit. All association accounts will be frozen, pending our investigation. I'd advise you to get a lawyer, a very good one." It was over, not with a bang, but with the cold, hard click of a financial guillotine. The power Karen wielded came from the HOA's money, and that money was gone. The crowd, the same people who had called me a villain just days before, now turned on her, their faces a mixture of fear and anger. The party was over. In the chaos that followed, I slipped away. I walked back to my farm. The water in my greenhouse had already begun to recede. The pressure was off, but the damage was done. My prized tomatoes were gone. My business was in ruins. I had won the war, but my little kingdom was a wasteland. A few months passed. The HOA was dismantled and restructured. Karen sold her house and moved away in the middle of the night. Frank's investigation uncovered years of fraud and kickbacks. The community was forced to spend a fortune to properly fix the drainage system they'd broken. Life, slowly, started to return to normal. I was out in my greenhouse one morning, cleaning up the last of the mess, when a government issue envelope arrived in the mail. I almost threw it away, figuring it was more legal nonsense. But I opened it. Inside was a check from the Internal Revenue Service. A whistleblower's reward. A percentage of the back taxes and penalties the IRS had recovered from Karen's fraudulent, non-profit operation. The number on the check had 6 zeros. I stood there, in the quiet of my greenhouse, holding more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I looked at the check, then at the empty planting beds. I could rebuild. I could buy all new equipment, the best seeds, everything. But the joy I expected to feel wasn't there. It was replaced by a quiet, heavy sense of finality. I had won. I had brought down a tyrant and saved my home. But I had paid a price. I'd lost my peace. I'd lost my trust in my neighbors. I'd become a fighter, a schemer. I looked down at my hands. They were the hands of a farmer, but they felt like the hands of a soldier. I put the check down on the workbench, next to the old brass water sampler. The tool hadn't lied. The water had told the truth. But sometimes, the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it just shows you the cage you were in all along. And what you do with that knowledge, well, that's a whole other story. If you've ever had to fight for what's right, even when it costs you everything, hit that like button. It helps to know you're not alone.